The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, welcome to We Speak Linux. This is our first meeting. We would like for you to join us on Slack if you can. We have a special channel called Webinar Chat where you can ask questions, or you can ask questions in GoToWebinar throughout the session. The purpose of our We Speak Linux is to teach Windows admins and developers Linux through our presentations, blog posts, and peer support through our Slack channels. And we want to grow a community of Windows admins and developers that are ready to transition to Linux. This is brought on by the fact that we as SQL people that have started this website, SQL's going Linux, and we want to learn Linux and transition over to Linux. So we figure there needs to be a community to help us do that. So if you're interested, please head over to the Slack channel and ask some questions as we go through this webinar. As far as the community goes, subscribe to our newsletter so we can keep you up to date on the different things that we got planned going forward, and to keep up with new webinars that come up. There's a link to join our Slack at the top of the web page, so you can just click join Slack and it will send you an email and let you sign into Slack. Also follow us on Twitter at We Speak Linux, and we will have a YouTube channel where we will upload all these videos, and I will be adding a link to the website afterwards so that you can get to those things. So.
Are you ready for me to take control here?
Yeah, and today we've got Kellyn speaking about Linux 101 for the SQL DBA, and we will turn it over to her. Now Kellyn should be in charge.
Show my screen. I'm used to WebEx. It takes me a little bit to reacclimate. Can everyone see my screen?
I can.
Good, that's important. Minimize everything here. I tell it to do something it's not doing. Okay, we'll just bring you over to the right and be happy with it. Okay. So my name is Kellyn Pot'Vin-Gorman. If you see the list of attendees on here, it's got my Klingon pronunciation. I believe it's a Kellyn Pot'Vin-Gorman, which is close enough. The French-Canadian pronunciation kind of gets everybody here. But let me get to from the beginning. I get so used to looking at these a certain way. And this session here is kind of fun for me because, you know, I've been in Linux. I've been working in it as an Oracle DBA for, oh gosh, a good 15 years. I think I got across my first Linux box, starting out in Solaris and other flavors of Unix, such as HPUX and EIX and those other flavors that are pretty much just dead now. But Linux is pretty much the source. It's it now. It is gold. And I remember a time when most Oracle, DBAs would look at it and go, I'm not working on Linux. That's the baby Unix. We don't touch that. And now, look where it is now. It's pretty amazing. So if you're not familiar with me, I am a multi-platform DBA. My first database was SQL Server. I was given a SQL Server 6.5 and 7. I had at one time the largest SQL Server 7 that was clustered on a compact SAN that was west of the Mississippi. So I learned the hard way. I lucked out that the SQL Server DBA that was rolling off, and there was just a phenomenal mentor and teacher and taught me how to manage SQL servers right. But I left the SQL Server world around SQL Server 2008. It was about 2012 timeframe. And my first book and my last time with SQL Server was SQL Server 2012, the Pro Practices book that was with some great people, Grant Fritchie and Gail Shaw, Chris Shaw, and there's a whole bunch of people. There are like 14 people in that book, but fantastic book. But now I've worked at Oracle, and now I'm back to a multi-platform company by the name of Delphix. I'm their technical intelligence manager, so I'm working very multi-platform again. And I love it. I love the SQL Server community. I've been well known within the Oracle community, but the SQL Server community is just fantastic. The data platform world is just fantastic. I think it's incredible how you guys communicate, how you guys work together, promote each other, bring in new speakers. And so I am a lucky participant to be part of that. And I have been so lucky to be part of it that I went from just being the president of my Rocky Mountain Oracle user group. I am now the president of my Denver SQL Server user group as well. So kind of sharing me between the two. I joke we got cats and dogs sleeping together, but hey, it's a lot of fun and I really enjoy it. These are both really incredible user groups and I'm lucky again to be part of them. So as we were talking about, Linux has come to the SQL Server world, and it's kind of an interesting situation. A lot of people were saying, is it really going to be successful? And as I was talking to my SQL Server or my Microsoft rep, as part of Delphix and that, we realized that this was really an important undertaking. That with the incorporation of DevOps into most environments, that Linux was going to be essential for Microsoft to be part of this. So it made it easier to, manage the environments and to troubleshoot issues and to incorporate the SQL Server database, that database platform in with everything else to be able to make it more seamless, to make tools more, cross-platform, and that it would be easier to report on usage and report on challenges. This session here, I kind of rewrote all of the slides so that I'm starting out from the get-go because so many people who went to my monitoring sessions were like, I hate to ask this and I hate to say this or admit it, but I don't know the first thing about Linux. So you're going to see slides that start out with learning how to walk before you run. And that was essential to me. I forgot this. I've been around here for so long in the Linux world that I forgot what it was like, not already knowing Linux, not already having all those Unix commands just, almost ingrained into my nervous system. And it shouldn't be that way. I think a lot of people are just feeling like, gosh, this is overwhelming. I've got all these odds against me and I'll never be able to understand Linux. And so we'll start out with a little bit of a history lesson. And Linux was started by Linus Torvalds. It started out, it was supposed to be named FreeX, as in it was a free version of Unix. But of course, everybody was like, oh, Linux is a god, he is a god. So it became Linux is the official name that ended up coming in. It is based on C. And the GNU project was part of this with Richard Stallman, and they ended up going forward. It's got over 15 million lines of code for the base kernel, and it's growing, of course, every single day and every single release. The compiler, the debugger, the binary utilities are all part of that GNU library, and much of it is also included with your Mac OS. So if you open up your Mac OS, you can go to the terminal, and you're using Linux right from the get-go. You find that out, that it's part of that. And you'll see that their mascot is Tux, the penguin. And this has been around for a long time, and there's a lot of flavors of it. I use something called Raspbian, which is a version of Debian on all my Raspberry Pis. So anybody who's into single-arm computers and all these kind of smart home projects and some of the small computer, I guess you call arenas, that's what we use is Raspbian, which is really cool. But many of us started out with Red Hat. That was kind of the powerful version of Linux. Oracle has its own version of Linux. And Ubuntu is something you see on most desktops. But when we talk about SQL Server, it's using either SUSE or we're seeing CentOS and some of the smaller versions of Linux that you'll be working on. Microsoft introduced this in 2016, so it's been around just a little while. Go forward here. So let's start out with user groups and groups. Versus what you're on, as a sysadmin and you're the administrator on a Windows box, it's a little bit different. You don't have the two layers of what I call the Windows administration server, where you've got the registry and then you have the front end kernel. And when you're talking about Linux, you do have just a simple kernel. You have the root user, which is also referred to as just, you look at it as dot when you're connecting in. That is the super user. It is God. And you don't really want to go in as God. God is all powerful, but God can also be, prone to human error. So do we as humans want to be logging in as that? Probably not. We leave that to our administrators who know what they're doing. Challenges for a SQL Server DBA is that starting out, your first Linux boxes may be in the Azure cloud. You may hope that you have somebody managing it, but you may need to understand these very fundamental pieces of Linux. So you're going to probably log in with your own user ID. You should. Any of you that have downloaded the Docker image for SQL Server. I will tell you the configuration on there is probably not very optimal. It's not the way that an Oracle database administrator, Sybase administrator, MySQL would configure. I'll take that back. MySQL, we do see some of them like this. Your SQL Server installation is configured as root, and that's kind of something we wouldn't do. You know, you think about it, do you really want DOD powers to go along with your database? Would you, install SQL Server as the domain admin? We really try to avoid that, don't we now? So this is the same thing for SQL Server on Linux. You would want it to have its own SQL Server user ID, and that it would have its own group with the least amount of permissions that are required to do what it needs to do without having God. So you would have your own login too. As a DBA, you would log in if your name is, John Smith. You would have a login called J Smith, and if you needed to do something as the SQL Server user, you would SU to, MS SQL and do the work as that. If you needed to do something that required root privileges, you would use something called sudo, and sudo is switch user as domain owner, and you would be able to do what you need to do there. So think about that. Is that SU, which is switch user, and SU is switch user to domain owner, are privileges that you're granted by your administrator to do what you need to do, and it's also something that's audited. And that's important too. So if something goes wrong, you have a paper trail of what occurred. Now, each one of these users have a user ID that is connected with it, and that's what is utilized to actually track this through the auditing process. Each user is assigned a group, and that role hierarchy process is down, and you can have more than one group that's assigned to a user. So you can be part of the DBA group, you can be part of an admin group, you can be part of a development group. Whatever needs to be assigned to that user can be done. It doesn't have to be just one group. You have a default group that is set that you will see in all of your permissions, but recognize that you can have more than one. And when you log in, most of the time, you will have a home directory that you can store your own files and scripts, etc., your profiles in it. You will hear the word profile or your bash RC. These are your commands. These are your executables that will set up your default. If you think of it like your environment variables in your Windows login, it's the same kind of thing, but we also have aliases and other necessary configurations that you're going to use. So let's talk a little bit more about the RC, which is the run commands, along with the profile. What you're going to have is your shells be used, and we'll talk a little bit more about shells too, because I think that is a real sore point as we go forward with Linux. We'll talk about your aliases, your environment variables, your path information, your file names, and you will see these files when you're looking at your bash RC, and you can see them at the bottom there, bash RC, bash underscore RC, dot profile, and then what the profile identifies as. When we have more than one version of Oracle on a box, we would have profile underscore 11G, profile underscore 12C. And these are executed depending on the actual role or process that's run for it to set up the proper Oracle application directory, to set up any of the script files that may have something direct that may not have a distinct environment variable, execute the right environment variables, things like that. So if you start thinking this is what is executed whenever you log in as the user with the appropriate profile, first the bash RC, then the profile, and then a defined profile if there's something specific that needs to be performed. And that is executed separately and can be done as part of a script. Now, an example of a profile is here, and this kind of gives you a pretty good idea of what they look like. First thing, of course, you see the #bang. This is to say that we're about to set something, and we set up the user bin shell. This is to say we're going to be using this shell as our example. This shell is our language. We would see BSH for bash, we would see KSH for corn shell. There are a number of different shells that people prefer. I know I myself was taught originally on corn shell, so I have a tendency to write everything in corn shell, but I've adopted bash since that seems to be the one that most people are preferring these days. But in this one here, you see it's just standard shell. PowerShell isn't here yet, and again, we'll talk about that a little bit more. It's one of those pain points I think that the Microsoft Linux team is going to have to take on one way or the other. The next piece is the editor. This tells them what the default editor is, and for this profile, it's Nano. I'm a Vi person, so we'll talk a little bit about that too. It tells you I'm pretty old school. The next is telling you that we have a sudo command that we give God powers to use Vi. That we export the path. Of course, those look very familiar to anyone that's looked at your path variables for Windows. That is here, along with different ones that you see for your environment variables here. Notice the first one for the export Oracle home has been commented out with a pound sign. That automatically comments that out. That one will be skipped. The next one is utilized. And I have one for the SQL home here. I wanted to show you an example of how I would set up SQL Server. If I was running a SQL Server on a Linux machine, I would have an alias. So I would be able to say CD, this is change directory, $SQL_home, all caps because it is cap sensitive. And I would automatically change to that directory path without having to type it in. So that, of course, saves me space. It's the same thing you see with Windows with aliases, with these environment variables. But this one here is how you would do it with Linux. I export my language, which is UTF-8, and I export my Java home because I am using Java with this. I'm going to need this as part of my library information. Then I have aliases, and aliases, of course, if I type in reload, it's going to automatically go in and reload. This is the bash profile. This is a secondary profile, and you can really name a profile really anything you want, but we usually started out with a dot, and then we would put profile just to identify it. You can see that we have other aliases in there. If we go alias cd ... it tells us this is to do cd space ... and it just saves us some typing. Next, we'll start talking about creating users. Now, users are really interesting, and I do not envy most administrators because the commands are interesting and have happened over time, and the legacy information has come over into Linux. So if you do user add, it's different than add user. Both of these will work, but user add requires more steps. Or if you do add user, it will then ask you to input password, to confirm the password. It will ask you for a group name. It'll ask you for information about the actual first name, last name, company information, phone number. It'll ask you specific information to completely fill out the user. Where if you do user add, it's going to require you to manually set up a password using the PASSWD command, which is password, to change your password. And be very careful of this as you're starting to become accustomed to this. If you were logged in as root or another user and just typed in password, enter, it's going to try to change the password for the user you're logged in as. To change the password for another user, especially if you're root, you have privileges to do this, you would need to type in password, passwd, with the username, and then update the password. But there's no real warning of this, so you need to be aware of this. You would need to manually assign a group, and you would have to do this with the user mod. You would have to manually create a group if they're not already existing with the group add command. And if you wanted to add any information about that user, you have to do that manually. So you can realize how different these two commands are, even though it really is just a switch in the interval of the words, the sequence of the words that are there. One of the things to remember, as we said, each user should have a login. You want to be able to track user activity. You don't want to share logins. You want to avoid non-audited access, as we talked about. You don't want to do most things as root, even though I know the Docker image comes with just root, and you go from there. You want to create other users. SQL Server should be installed as SQL Server. It should run as that, so it makes it easier to manage actual processes when you're looking at the process IDs or PIDs. And you want to be able to look at what users are doing. You don't want them doing everything as God and making mistakes. You only want to grant sudo when it's absolutely required. Many DBAs have sudo, not all DBAs do. Some administrators only allocate out sudo with great restraint, and anything that you need to do, even to finish up an install in Oracle, is run. The shell scripts at the end that require sudo privileges are run by the administrator. It does happen. And same thing with SU. To be able to switch a user and become that user and to perform tasks as them, it may make sense when it's like a schema. You know, if you think of it, a schema user in the system that owns an application, then that makes sense. But to do it outside of that, to say, I'm going to give you grants to somebody else, you can switch over to that user and do work as them, that's kind of a concern. You can audit it still because you're given the SU, but you do become that user, and it can be at top level a little concerning to see you doing work as someone else. So let's go a little bit deeper into SU. To switch to a user, SU minus, and then I put in the new username, and it will switch over, and I become J. Smith. To execute a command as root with the sudo privileges, I would go in and put sudo and then the command. So here I'm executing a shell script, and whatever arguments are required. And this one I said -y, so it requires a -y argument behind it. But you can see that then it would execute. Now, interesting enough, if you tried to do this and you didn't have sudo privileges, you're going to see the arrow that you see at the bottom here in the screenshot. If you're not in the sudoers file, this incident will be reported. That means that it's audited and they're saying, hey, this person tried to sudo and they're not in the sudo, and I'm letting you know they did. So it's, some people are very, very concerned about that, and they want to let you know. It's kind of a concern. So next, let's go on to file permissions. And file permissions are really interesting, and there's more than one way to look at this, because you can see the RWX on here, read, write, X. You can do that to actually change permissions on a file. But there's also numbers that coincide with each one of these permissions. So read equals 4, write equals 2, execute equals 1. So when we're granting permissions, they can have a total max of 7 allocated for each group, which is the owner, the group, and then the other. So if you start seeing these, this is how you calculate and figure out what permissions you want to give. So if I wanted to grant read to the owner, and we'll try this again, all to owner, read to group and other, it would be 7, 4, 4. If I wanted to allocate, you know, all to owner, because you usually do give all to it unless there's some reason you would only want to get read and want to protect it. We want to get read write to group and only read to it, we would do 7, 6, 4. You can see how these calculations are going to change. And that's what I'm trying to give you the example of here. So this is change mod or change modify, and this is how we would change it. The command is change mod, the actual file name, and then the value. Sorry about that. Let me get rid of that. So let's say we've got this test text file that we want to change the permissions of. I would type in change mod, test.txt, and then put in the privileges. Now, I'm going to also make a note of this for you as we go forward. As you see my examples, you'll see a $ in front of those. That is just to say that's my command prompt. That's my prompt value. Sometimes it's a pound, sometimes it's a $. Just ignore that. The actual command is change mod, CHMOD, the file name, and you can see by what I put here, 764, the owner has read, write, execute, the group has read, write, and the other has read. Now, if I want to update the permissions and I don't have rights to do it, but I do have God rights, I can do it. I'm just, what it means, I'm not the owner and I don't have rights as a group person to do this. I could sudo, if I have those privileges, and go sudo change mod, test 764. And that means I became root, so I'm God, I can do anything I want. Change, modify the file, file name, and then change the permissions to what it needs to be. And next you say, well, I wasn't the owner, I really want to be the owner of this file. To do that, we use what's called the change owner command, and that's CHO. And that would be, it's kind of interesting, it seems a little backwards, I think, when I was first starting to learn this, is that it was change owner, new user, new group, and then the file name. And the new group, it can be the same group or a new group, whatever it needs to be, but you need to set a group as well with this. So you would do change owner, you would do the username of who's going to be the new owner, colon, the group, and then the file name. And you need to have permissions of this. Otherwise, you're going to have to do the same thing, which is a sudo, or switch user to the user that owns the file. So those are two ways of being able to do this. But you will have to do that to actually get forward with this and make those changes. So here's a quick little table that gives you some standard commands that you'll be using. This is very similar within Windows as well. There's only a few of these that trip me up when I get on a Windows command prompt, and that's probably the second one down, which is ls. It's similar to dir directory, so that's the thing to remember, but I don't know how often I'm on a Windows command prompt and I type in ls and it says, didn't understand that, try again. So keep that in mind. But change directory is cd, and you'll see there's some examples of it behind that. Next is ls, and the common ones we use ls to look at just the file names real quick that belong in a directory, but ls minus ls and ls minus la is very common. Ls minus la allows you to see everything in the directory list in ascending order, and you're going to see all the files that start with dot because those aren't displayed just with an ls or an ls minus ls. Next is find. So you may be looking to find what Java installations there are, or SQL or MS SQL, and you'd be able to go find SQL Server, find Java, find SQL. It's going to tell you what installations are out there. You want to know which one's being used. This is just like looking at what environment variables were set when you logged in. Which MS SQL am I using? Let's say you have more than one Oracle installation. Which Oracle? This would tell you. Which Java? You can find out, am I using Java version 6.1? Am I using Java, 8.1? You would be able to see that. It would tell you. So that's what the which command does. PWD tells you what directory you're currently in. So if you type in PWD, it'll show you the tree hierarchy and where you're at in your path. Create directories. Make dir. So I can say make dir script, make dir and put in a full path and where I want to be. Wherever you're at, if you type in make dir, it's going to make that directory right where you're at too, in the present directory. To create a file, we do touch very often. So we can say touch test.sh and an empty file will be created. If we want to edit a file and create a file at the same time, you can do vi or vim. And you're going to see that in the next line, vim, vi. You can also do nano, you can do emacs with the file name, and it's going to create that file. And next is more destructive, which is your remove. So you do remove file name, rm. If you're trying to remove a directory, if it's empty, you can use rmdir. If it actually has files within the directory, you won't be able to do rmdir. It's going to protect those that are underneath. You can do what is, and you've probably seen, I've even got a sticker on the back of my PC that says this, rm minus rf, which is a force. And when you do a force, it will remove everything. It thinks that you know what you're doing, and it's not going to hesitate. There is a funny sticker that says rm minus rf and at root dot. And what that's saying is that you can erase everything from the root down, and you're going to scar your drive, scar other systems. So keep that in mind. This is a very powerful command, and there's a reason I don't have it listed here, because I'd hate somebody to do that without that disclaimer, realizing that, yeah, you can destroy your entire server with it. So next, let's look at processes here. And if you have any questions, definitely ask those questions. I may not answer them till the end, but know that I will answer them one way or the other. You'll definitely get some answers out of me here. PS, processes. We use process a lot with Oracle, and one of the reasons is that for each background process, we have a separate PID or process ID that's attached to it. One of the things that you'll notice here on my screen is that you will see one is the actual SQL Server, the shell for it that executes it. The next two, PID 5 and PID 7, are the two SQL Server processes that are running. SQL Server is a multi-threaded system, which means all of your other background processes, all your transaction log processing, all of your memory, everything that's allocated out is done in multi-threaded. And because that is being done, you're not seeing these as separate PIDs. I'm hoping in the future that SQL Server will break this out because it makes it much easier to manage. It makes it much easier to do deep tracing upon this when you get into the back end of your Linux kernel. This is all very important information, and having just two PIDs to process or to actually troubleshoot is very hard. I can use a utility called PMAP to look into the memory allocation for each one of those and troubleshoot that way. But I had to go back into sys processes to see what each of those are. So right now, SQL Server is still in its infancy within Linux, but it's one of the things that we may want to see built out, and I have made a recommendation to the Microsoft team for that. To kill a process, pretty easy. Let's say you couldn't get your SQL Server down. You could do kill and do 7. And yeah, SQL Server hopefully would come down. If it didn't, you could do kill -9 and 7. -9 pretty much says kill without remorse, kill without hesitation, destroy it. another destructive command, so use it very carefully. And let's say the person SU'd over to Jeff here. Remember, Jay Smith, remember I said that if you SU, we can trace you. You can see it right here, root, PID number 23790, then goes to 21897 and is SU'd over to Jeff Smith. So this bash command here as root 21897 is really coming from root. You can see this. So this one here, 21897 SU'd over to Jeff and is now 23790. So understand we can trace these as you SU over and keep track of who has become who. Next, we'll go into editors. Like I said, I'm a Vi person. Also, it's installed now as Vim. Vi is very, very old school. I usually recommend anybody who's starting to do Linux to really invest in Vim, and there's a reason for it. It recognizes you as part of a kind of a select cool group. It says that you know what you're doing, even if you don't. It's worth the time to invest in it. It's on just about every single system. You know you're going to get it. If you try to use Nano and it's not installed, you have to go out there and get it installed, or even worse, go to your administrator and ask him to install a package. So that can be a pain. Same thing with Emacs. You always know you have Vi available. I haven't come across a host yet that didn't have an editor like this. A couple Docker containers that are new, didn't have it on my Raspberry Pi, but it's so rare not to have a server that has a Vi or Vim installation, so definitely consider that. If you want to create a file, like we said, you can touch the file name. And how do you use Vi? Pretty easy. You type in Vi and you put in your file name. And then you got a keyboard. There is no GUI interface for this, but the keyboard is pretty easy to use. Your fingers never leave the keyboard with it, which makes life very, very easy. So if you were starting to type and you wanted to go down one line, you just hit J. You want to go up a line, K. To the right, L. To go to the left, H. You can see how your fingers are going to move. You want to insert, you hit I. You want to append A. If you want to append to the very end of the line, you're in the middle of it. It would actually be a capital A. I need to fix that. Sorry, there's a mistake there. You want to add a line, and the insert one below is O. If you want to do one above, it's capital O. If you want to undo, it's U. To quit without saving is a :Q. If you want to quit without saving to a read-only file, because you could have done a view in file name, or let's say you tried to buy a file that is read-only, it wouldn't let you. It would, the permissions aren't set. That means that you only have the rights, so it's 444 on the file, or read for everybody. It wouldn't let you write to the file, which would be a :W or a :W bang. We call bang for exclamation point. But these are just a good cheat sheet for you to start playing around with Vi or Vim. Their commands are the same on these. And it's really a cool way to start working with this, and you'll find that you quickly become very acclimated to it, and your fingers are never leaving the keyboard, and you can edit everything. And like I said, it's on every single host. Apologies. So let's talk about redirecting. Redirecting is kind of a very interesting concept. So let's say that you write a command, but you want to save off that information. It's pretty easy. You can, let's say ls means that we're going to pull the information from a directory, and we just redirect it with a caret over to a file. So I say file list.txt. Of course, this file is going to be created in the directory that I'm there. So I could do // file directory, whatever I want, it's going to save it wherever I name that file. If I wanted to append it, I just need to use 2 carets. That's just saying 2 of them, saying just keep adding to this file. So if I had a running log that I was adding more data to, I would just continue to use the 2 carets instead of 1. Very easy to append, very easy to create logs. If you have write commands, write privileges to the directory, you can write everything that you need there and create files as you're going on. Now, next, we're going to go into how to take care of and protect your Linux system. There's a number of different ways. There's a lot of Linux admins that love Yum. I happen to be more of an apt-get person, and the reason is because, well, I come from a Raspberry Pi world as well. When I started doing more administration, it was on my Raspberry Pi, so I was using that on a regular basis. Both of those work very similar. Zipper's a little different, and I'm seeing Zipper more often. So I want to keep that in line too and keep that out there. At the very end of this slide deck, I have a cheat sheet, or actually it's coming up here in a slide, a cheat sheet so you can get more familiar with apt-get and Yum, because it'll come in handy if you want to work with some of these packages or work with different tools that I go into in the later slides. You'll need to be able to install them. Let's say you've got a Docker image or a VM, and this will be important for you to use with it. So using apt-get is pretty easy. To update your Linux system, all you have to do is do apt-get update. If you don't have privileges, you would do sudo apt-get update. After you've updated your repository, then you need to run the install, and you would do sudo apt-get install or apt-get install. Now this will install only the required packages at that point, just like running a Windows update on a regular basis, but you do this manually. You can set it up as a scheduled job, but you can do this manually as often as you want. So keep that in mind, that this is very easy to manage. There is no reboot required. Very, very rare you're going to have a package or a patch that requires a reboot on Linux systems. I mean, most Linux systems are up for years at a time. So, you know, there's no registry changes that need to be put into place by a cycle of power. So that's one of the main differences when we're talking about a Linux system or a Unix system too. So let's say next you have a package that you want to add. One of the packages I had to run the other day, I realized that my Docker image didn't have the less package. And less is kind of neat because it allows me to take a look at a file and just get it one line at a time. I can, you know, it's a big file and I only want to start going through one line. So I can actually go into the file at a certain line and then just have it return one line at a time without opening the file, without concern of typing in the file or anything else. It's just going to return the line one at a time and I can view it open. So I went out there and started doing it. And with apt-get, I would have to go sudo apt-get install -y less. And that would tell me that I'm installing that package. If I needed to go find it, I could do apt-cache, which is the cache information to look into the repository to make sure I have that package. A lot of times you would have to do this after running an update to make sure you have the latest packages if it's a new one, and do apt-cache package name less. And I would put the less package name. They're not always named the same thing as the command. Sometimes it's a bigger package that has multiple commands in it, but you can find them by searching, you know, with show, and you can put, there's a grep command that I go into, and I know my big precon that I'm doing like in Raleigh, but you can do different ways of searching the apt-cache, the repository, to see what's going on in there and what packages you have and what components in there. So I can look at the package information like apt-cache show less, and it's going to show me any packages that this one is dependent upon, that I have to be pre-installed. It's going to show me what is involved in the installation, and then it's going to show me any information name, like which release I have, how big the package is, how much space it requires, how much memory it uses, things like that. So the show command is pretty neat too. And here's those cheat sheets. So if you're interested in getting familiar with Yum, apt-get, and Zipper, depending on what you're using for your Linux installation, you know, CentOS or, you know, Debian or whatever you're doing, you may need to know different installers. So I wanted to make sure that you have those, and this will show you everything you need to know, including how to add repositories, locations, how to update, how to do just about anything. They're very helpful, so I've added these. These are some of my favorites. So if you're interested, they'll be on the slide. So here's what we were talking about. I do think that Microsoft is going to have to ship PowerShell over to the Linux system. I've not seen that yet. If anybody has, correct me. But PowerShell has become such an adopted worldwide sensation within the SQL Server community. And PowerShell scripts are written so different and have been adopted so widely that they're going to have to find a way to ship it over, just as K-Shell and C-Shell are pretty much global across any kind of Unix, Linux installation. You're going to have to start seeing it for PowerShell. So cross your fingers. Ask people for it. If you are a PowerShell maven and you really love it, start pushing on Microsoft to do this because this is something that's going to be really kind of necessary, I think, for Linux to be fully adopted into the Microsoft community.
Hey, Kellyn.
So definitely. Yeah.
They have put a limited version of PowerShell Core onto Linux.
Yay. I'm so glad to hear that because this has been a sore spot for me. I know how much everybody lives for their PowerShell, so I will update this slide because I was just thinking about this and I couldn't find anything. Thank you. So let's go into the diagnostics. Anytime that you're a database administrator, you need to know how to troubleshoot, how to manage the system, how to see when there's performance issues, and that's what we're going to talk a little bit about here. I lightened this up with, like I said, the 8-hour pre-con. I'm able to go into this a lot deeper, and I know this next week I'm going to be doing a deep level tracing session at an Oracle conference, an Oracle Performance Conference. But this will give you a little bit of information on how you're going to manage and perform. And I know that most people are going to learn a little bit more about this as I see the upcoming We Speak Linux sessions. So I'm not going to go very deep into it, but it'll give you a little bit of information. And the ones that you're going to see, even though I talk about STAR and SADC, SADF, MPStat, and VMstat, top is going to be your most common one. And top is really nice because it does have a interface that is very user-friendly. It gives you the information that you need, just the facts. What you do need to know is that with all of these, they have just very similar types of arguments where they are cap sensitive. Again, we are in the Unix world. You can put in how many seconds to sleep before they refresh and how many times you want it to return. So keep that in mind too, so you can override a lot of this. As well as the help is minus, it's actually minus H on most of these. So you can do minus H and it'll give you information. If it doesn't return a lot of info, try minus help as well, actually write out help. Some of them have that opportunity as well. So the thing to remember with SAR is that these are pretty easy to install. I put the commands down at the bottom if you want to test some of these out. Yum -y install sysdat, apt-get install sysdat. Notice that they're extremely similar. The -y is just to override it prompting you and asking you if you want to install it. So you can type this with or without that. I wanted to make sure that it's clear in it. But these are really cool because they're going to provide you that information about your CPU usage, any virtual memory usage if you're swapping, I/O and network. Microsoft we've gotten away from the whole idea that swapping may be all right, we'll deal with it. On the Linux side, we hate swapping. We want nothing to do with swapping, and we will get away from it as much as humanly possible. So definitely be aware of that as we're looking at it. And these are installed as root. You want these set up as the root user. So most of the time when these are being installed, they're being installed by your administrator. You're not the one installing this, but if you do, definitely install it as root. There's a lot of different ways to execute these, and I wanted to show you a couple different ones. SAR -U to give you the user information and how it's utilizing memory and I/O and any of that. And then SAR versus 1 and 3, again, 3 times, intervals of 1 second. And then these different arguments so that you can test these out and take a look at these. And you can see the actual output from here. This is pretty simple. I mean, you're seeing, how much is the CPU idle? What is the user percentage? What's nice? It's kind of the average. What's it usually at? Because the CPU, you're usually on it or you're off of it and it's telling you. It also tells you what the I/O weight is. So there's a lot of I/O on this system. The system example that you're seeing here is actually one of my Delphix source machines. And so the Linux source, this is your golden copy. So there's a lot of reads coming from this. So that's why this one's heavy on reads. And it's not so much on the CPU. Because people aren't making calls to this, they're just pulling, I/O. So that's why you're seeing these kind of results on here. But this would come back 5 times every 5 seconds by this command here. It's just showing me the user usage. But each one of these are going to show different kinds of information depending on the arguments that I put in. Then you have like SADC. This is a backend system activity, and it's pretty cool. You can formulate it any way you want. The output you can do in text or XML, which is awesome. You can also consume all the data. So if you want to bring it into MS Excel, and then auth, which we didn't talk about much, when we're pulling in data and creating reports and doing trends and analysis in that. We will grep for data, awk will cut different data. There's a lot of different commands that give us a lot of power to pivot and change data from the way that it's presented, to capture just certain pieces of the data from the output. So when you see awk, this is just part of that. It's all part of the processes that you learn as you start to work forward with shell scripting and that. MPStat is CPU information. These are processor level statistics. On this one here, you can see I'm looking for all the processors that want all the information. And unfortunately, my little Linux source only had 2 CPUs. So you can see CPU 0 and CPU 1. And it gives me the information, tells me how much it's idle, what IO weights I have. Very similar to the top values. You can see they're not very different. Same thing with the SADC. All of these utilities are more about what you are comfortable with. What are you used to? We're not very much people of change. So knowing what you are used to seeing and how you want to capture it as quick as possible so you can go on to troubleshooting a problem, that's going to be essential for how you capture this data. But know that if you don't have one utility in the box, you can look at these other ones to capture that information quick. That's something that you notice as you go from company to company, is that depending on the administrator, because the administrator usually is the one installing this, they're usually the one making the choice. You'll have one that likes MPStat. You'll have one that says, top is the standard. You'll have other ones, top is, and I will tell you, top is usually the standard. You'll have another one that says, I like SADC. And other ones like VMstat. Again, IO weight is here. All the standards. The actual output looks a little different, but everything is pretty much the same no matter which utility you look at. And of course, this one is the virtual memory stats. And again, we're looking at top. This is the default. I went and grabbed this information from my SQL Server. You can see that for my Docker container, what's going on, including the kernel threads. So you can see that down at the bottom there. That is captured as well, and we'll start with the processes that are using the most resources and descending. And you'll be able to see how much memory is being used. Swap top gives you just a nice, quick top look of what's going on, and you can work from there. You can also see uptime. Uptime, I think this is kind of essential because we expect most Linux machines to always be up and always be running, but let's say something is wrong. We can look at uptime, and it does tell you what's going on in the system. So I can type in uptime, and it'll tell me what's going on. You know, how long have I been up for? You can see for this one here, it's 41 days, 17 minutes. And remember, this was just a little VM that I was playing around with this on. I can do W, and it's going to tell me that info, but also the logged in users. So I can see my Delphix user is logged in on this too. And that I can see what. That means it's running a shell. It's actually logged in, it's idle, and it's running a shell, and it can tell me how much CPU usage, all kinds of stuff, and how long it's been logged in. There's a whole bunch of good information on here. Now, we were just talking about PS for process status. Now, there's a lot to do with PS because most of the time we're worried about what processing is going on, what's using users. These are just some of those utilities to actually work with them. And the PS, the ones that we use most often are PS minus EF or EAF, which gives us information about the current processes and who's using what, PS minus AUX and PS minus EO. It requires a lot of different information depending on what parameters you're looking for, but it'll give you recent CPU usage, memory, all these fun stuff. And if it's, you know, it really is kind of a homegrown top command when we start looking at it. But one of the things that's very interesting about it is that we're going to see information about each one of our users, and not just like this one here, it tells you what writers are working on, what disk. So X4, that disk there. We can see the actual kernel processes that are starting with K. You can see the K audit D. I think you can pretty much figure out what that's doing. That's the audit process for the kernel. We can go through these and look and see what's going on. There's an RPC going on in the background. We can sort this information. You'll notice one of the things in this command, the PS minus EF, is that there's a pipe. So we can pipe more commands. I can say sort, and then I can say just the tail of it. So just grab me that tail. So understand that many of these commands we'll end up doing our own little processing on to get the information that we want. We can also do this a little bit farther and say, I want different columns that I want to be brought back. So PS minus EO, and I say I want the user, I want the process ID, I want the CPU, I want to know what communications are going on, and it'll just bring me back all the information that I've requested. And it's going to give it to me in kilobytes. And what's interesting about this is we can also start looking at users and start troubleshooting them. So right now I've done a PS-EAF and I grep for jar. Now jar is for Java. And it tells me that I have one Java process that's coming from my Delphix user, and the PID is 11313. I can then do a PS EWW 11313, which gives me more distinct information about that process ID. And if you notice, it will not only tell me all the, the libraries that are being used and everything else, it also tells me that it's running a shell. It tells me it's running in the terminal. The user is Delphix. It tells me the path. And yes, if the password was there, it could show it in plain text. Not very often, but if somebody wrote this wrong, it could. It tells me what the home directory is. It tells me the shell level, the log name, and then it tells me the information about what executable it's running. So I can see all of that from here just by running this process. You can see where PS is a very powerful utility that allows you to troubleshoot when things are going wrong. So you can trace down things as they're going. Next, we'll dig into a little bit of CPU and memory diagnostics, and we're getting pretty close to ending here. So I'm going to dig through these. Next is PMAP. We're going to do one more here. PMAP minus X, and we're using that Java process again, that 11313 that we were talking about. What's interesting is PMAP will actually map out every single memory allocation for every file, every background memory process, everything that's going on, every library, every ISO, everything that is happening. It will tell you how much memory is used by everyone, and then it'll total it at the end. This is really incredible. If you need to really look deep into what's going on, PMAP is one of the ways to do it. And the next and last piece I'll go over is LSOF. I'm not going to go into FUser, but I will go into LSOF before we end here. This is for a list of open files. That's what that actually, LSOF, is list of open files. And list of open files is interesting. If we look at the file, the one that you see at the very top here with the FUser command, which tells me what users have what file open. So I can put in an actual file name and say FUser, and it's telling me all the PIDs of who has this open. I can then notice, I'll say PS-EF and grep for that user. You can see them up above, and then I grep them. It tells me who it is, and that's where I was talking about each one of the Oracle background processes have their own process ID identified. I can see that the recovery process is shown here. I can see that there's a memory Oracle background process, and I can see that there's a front end user, which is that Oracle that you see there. Those are all have this file they're accessing, which is the system data file. I can troubleshoot that. With LSOF, I can also start looking at some of these. Except I don't have it in here. I do have some files, but you can actually look at a file and it'll tell you everyone that has it open and also what applications have it open, everything else. So these two utilities, FUser and LSOF, are very powerful to have as well. And with that, I think we're just about out of space and out of time. I won't lie to you, there's a lot of stuff in here. I tried to put so much in here that you would have plenty to play around with if you download the slide deck. So the one thing I'm going to tell you, learn to walk before you run. Command line is essential. It's very, very powerful, but there are things like find mount, stuff like that, that will give you trees of your hierarchy files and utilities that will give you more comfort level with what you're looking at, your performance and your monitoring, but build up your skills. Start using bots. Like I said, learn how to edit these files from the command line and do everything that you already know how to do from your Windows server, but from the Linux system. And as you start to do this more and more practice, it'll become more comfortable. And with that, I am done.
So does
Tracy,
anybody,
are there
there's, got questions on best practices for pacemaker and availability groups? Is the only question that
pacemaker
came.
and availability group? So Linux clustering is a little bit different with availability groups with SQL Server. I have not worked with it on Linux yet. I would have to look into that and get back to you.
Okay, and then we got a thank you. That was pretty much it.
That's it.
And everybody
And if
asking
you're in the
where
rally
your
level,
slide decks are going to be and whether it's going to be recorded. That was pretty much it. So
it is recorded. I've been told that they will put it up on YouTube. It will be available there. My slide decks will also be put up on SlideShare, as well as sharing them with Tracy. So if the We Speak Linux session or page has a place where they're going to keep slide decks, they'll be available there as well.
okay.
Like I said, I built this all out yesterday, as I'm doing a few slide decks right now. But I didn't want to take anything away. I think everything in here is very productive, and it's probably a 2-hour session, but you'll find that the slides pretty much speak for themselves, and you can start playing around with this stuff and get familiar.
All righty. Well, I will take back control and show my slides. Thank you very much. Again, We Speak Linux. We got to shrink everything. And everything wants to get in the way. But we are Speak Linux, and that will not get out of the way.
I did want to add in here, if anybody needs to get a hold of me, I'm easy to get on Twitter at DBA Kevlar, so I'm the Bulletproof DBA. And you are more than welcome to use the We Speak Linux on the hashtag, and or email me at dbakevlar@gmail.com. I'm glad to answer any questions.
Yes. So we're encouraging everybody to, like I said, we're trying to build up a community here for everybody to learn Linux. So subscribe to our newsletter so we can keep you up to date on things that are coming up. We're going to be using our newsletter sparingly. Try to join our Slack so we can have some community building and sharing of information there. We do have a Twitter account where we'll be announcing any upcoming events. There's going to be a link to our YouTube channel right here. We're going to add it to the website so it'll be easy to find. So we'll update the slide deck there and put the recording there. We will be meeting the first Thursdays of every month. So upcoming next month, we have Navigating the Linux Command Line at Olympic Speed by Andrew Mallett. And then we're going to learn about DevOps from Whitney Champion. And then we're going to have a really interesting session about hunting down viruses by Thomas Lemons Haley on June 7th. I did not pronounce his last name right. I know I didn't. So other than that, we are done if there's no other questions. And I will double check the questions. And we have no questions. Everybody's just saying thank you. Awesome session. Thank you very much, Kellyn, for being our first participant in the event.
And have a great Thursday.